Hello and welcome back to the channel, and today I'm going to talk about the Space Sheriff series. Thought it'd be a good idea to make this video with Gavin Infinity coming out recently. So today I'll go through the three of the Space Sheriff series, Gavin, Sharavan, and Scheider. Just talk about my feelings towards them and whether I think they're worth watching. So without further ado, in this video I will talk about the Space Sheriff series. So for my overall thoughts about them, I think they're good fun. They're definitely products of their time, and I wasn't expecting much going in, but they're the first season of tokusatsu that I've watched that came up before 1991, and I'm definitely glad that I did, because at the very least, it made me excited to watch more older toku, even though I'm not a huge fan of how older toku works. It was definitely a lot of fun, like harking back to a simpler time, and I definitely like that about it. It does some cool things, especially with the action. The action looks pretty cool, especially in Gavin. But overall, I feel like it's a pretty decent series, and I'm glad that I watched it. So I'm talking about Space Sheriff Gavin, which in my opinion is the best of the three by a pretty wide margin. I wouldn't say this is peak cinema or anything, but it's just solid episodic fun. My biggest problem with it is probably that it doesn't really have any overarching story, but the action was so good that it kept me hooked. And overall, my favorite of the three Space Sheriff series is the first. I really like Retz as a main character. He's just a nice guy, which all of the Space Sheriffs are kind of just same nice guy archetype, but I like him the most just because he can be cool and charismatic and also can be funny when he needs to without him feeling like a complete joke. But the coolest part about him is that his actor Kenji Oba can do his own stunts. He's a stuntman, so a lot of the out-of-suit action is just so cool, and it's honestly so good it blows the in-suit action out of the water, and that's the best part of it. All the action here is so good. Probably the best out-of-suit action I've ever seen in any toku, and he's just a great protagonist to follow. Even though his relationship with his father isn't a huge point throughout most of the season, it's definitely the only plot point in any of these seasons that I actually feel emotionally attached to because of how much I like Retz, and I feel like that plot point is actually resolved really well, even though it's in only like 10% of the actual show. So I really like Retz. He's a good main character. The other characters I don't really care about. Mimi is a decent supporting character. I like her in relation to the other female supporting characters from their season just because she's the only one that has a romantic relationship with the main Space Sheriff, and I was afraid that all of them would be like that and they aren't, so that makes me like Mimi more because there's something that differentiates herself from the other two. The other characters I don't really care about. I like Kojiro. He's a funny comic relief scientist guy, but the people at the horse ranch I don't really care about. None of the characters besides Retz and Mimi really matter. The Maku are not very good villains. Don Horror is such a bad main villain. He literally can't even fight Gavin because he basically doesn't have his own body. He literally sits around all the time. All he does is open up Maku space every single episode. That's all he does. Hunter Killer is really interesting as a rogue space sheriff, but he's not very intimidating because every single episode his plans are foiled. And then in episode 30, he's just sent off into space and you never see him again until like the second to last episode where he just dies such a stupid death out of nowhere. And that was just such a waste of potential. And after episode 30, they introduced Sandorvo, which is Don Horror's son, and he's not very interesting. Kind of just takes the role of Hunter Killer as his plans get foiled every single episode. But he also brings along Witch Kiba, who's kind of funny, but I wouldn't call her that good of a villain either. So the villains here just suck. None of the Monsters of the Week are that memorable either, so they're not very good. Like I said earlier, the season's pretty much exclusively episodic. There's pretty much no overarching story besides Gavin searching for his dad, which is in only like 5 or 6 episodes at the most. The plot of the episodes themselves don't even really matter. They're more just a vehicle to get Gavin into unique situations. It's more focused on action than characters more than any toku that I've ever seen, but at least they still got the subplot with Gavin and his dad, which I liked. I will say I do like the formula of how the episodes are structured, where Gavin actually has to investigate the Maku's plan, and then the action is focused around that. And the action is definitely the best because there's so many unique locations he visits. Obviously the out-of-suit action with Kenji Oba is super cool. It's just whenever he transforms into his suit is where I lose attention a lot because it always follows the exact same formula. He always transforms into his suit, asks to re-explain his Jochok process. He does a little fight, great. Then he gets sucked into a Maku space, has to explain the Maku space every single episode, and then it just sucks him into usually the rock quarry, but at least in Gavin, in the Maku space sections, there are varied locations rather than just the rock quarry or the soundstage, so that's at least cool. And then he has to do a sword fight with the monster of the week, and then he kills it with a Gavin dynamic, which is funny because they use the same exact stock footage of a monster exploding, and it's so funny. They even use it for Sandorva and Witch Kiva's deaths, which I think is hilarious. So overall, it's just the structure and the formula, which all the other Space Sheriff series follow. It just gets old really fast, and the Attitude stuff is so cool that it's really disappointing at how formulaic and lame the in-suit action is. The aesthetics for the season are pretty good. I think Gavin's suit has its charms, but it definitely looks really goofy by today's standards, and it's definitely the worst looking of the 3 Space Sheriff suits. The music here is really good. All the instrumental tracks are really good. Opening theme is pretty good. It has one of the best closing themes in any toku that I've ever seen. I just don't like a lot of the insert themes, except for Bokuran the Superhero Gavin. That's the only one I actually like. And even though I don't really like his ship, the Dolgeron, the fact that he has a space dragon on it just makes it the coolest ship out of all, even though I like the other two's ship better. The fact that he has a space dragon just obviously makes it cooler. So overall, Gavin is just a very enjoyable classic toku show. It's mostly episodic, which I'm not huge on, but it definitely has the biggest hook out of all of the Space Sheriff series, and that's the great attitude action, and that's what kept me hooked every single time I booted up an episode. And like I'll talk about later, even though Gavin's searching for his dad is a really cliche storyline, it's the only storyline out of all of these shows that actually felt like had an emotional impact, and for that, I think it's the best of the Space Sheriff series. Moving on to Charivan, which in my opinion is the weakest. Not by that much. I think all of these shows are pretty close together in quality, but in my opinion, Charivan is the weakest. As the follow-up to Gavin, I expected it to improve upon it, and while it improves in some aspects, like introducing a more fleshed out story, villains are slightly better. I just think overall it's so inconsistent that I don't like it as much as Gavin. Add into that the action isn't as cool, and some of the things with the story I don't like a lot, and that just leads me to not liking it as much as Gavin. Still enjoyable, but not as much as Gavin. Den is a fine protagonist, just like Gavin. He's kind of just the exact same template of character as like a nice guy, but the main problem I have with him is that he's basically a chosen one. He's a descendant of this planet Iga, which is the main overall story of the show is about returning to planet Iga, and he's a descendant of it, and it makes him like a chosen one character, and that's my least favorite trope in all of fiction is a chosen one. Add into that every single time he meets a descendant of Iga, he trusts them unconditionally, even in an episode where a descendant of Iga betrays him and tries to kill him. He literally immediately forgives him, and I just don't like that about him. It's not brought up too much, so it's not that big of a deal, but I just don't like chosen one characters, and also his unconditional trust of everyone who's Planet Ego. I just don't really like that about him. Characters overall are probably slightly better than Gavin, but not by much. That's mostly just because I like Lily more than Mimi. She just directly helps with the missions more than I feel like Mimi did, and that's kind of the only reason I like her more. Kojiro's back, he's still funny, but all the people at the bike shop I could care less about. The Mado are slight improvement over the Maku, but not by much. King Psycho is more intimidating than Don Horror, and he at least has a second body that he can fight with, but kind of the same as Don Horror. He just sits around for 95% of the season, opens up Vision World, and that's basically it. The only other villain really worth mentioning is Raider, and that's only because he pits the other two villains, Dr. Polter and Geiler, against each other. But he mostly just sits around the entire season and then just is killed by King Psycho in the end. They're slightly better than the Maku, but really not by much. As I said before, Charivan makes some improvements over Gavin, and that comes in a more fleshed out story. It feels like an actual direct sequel to Gavin, where a lot of the same characters show up. Gavin is back as a commander type. He helps Charivan in a couple episodes. I like that he isn't too much of a focus, though I kind of wish he was the recurring commander instead of only in like 12 or 13 episodes. The overall story and world building is stronger. Like I said, with Planet Iga and all the things attached to that, it introduces more space themes, which I feel like was necessary. It's called Space Sheriff, and there wasn't that many space themes in Gavin, so I'm glad that there are more like aliens and stuff here. But what I really don't like is the inconsistency, and that's kind of the whole downfall of this season, where it feels like it's boom or bust. Either it's an episode I really like where it focuses on Planet Iga stuff, it has an interesting connection to like the overall lore of Space Sheriff, or it's just a random episode. that has nothing to do. And unfortunately, most of the episodes have just nothing to do with the story, even though it's pretty interesting. It could be followed out throughout the season. It's just boom or bust, and that's not what I like about it. The action overall is just worse than it is in Gavin by a pretty wide margin. You don't have Kenji Oba anymore, so the out-of-suit action isn't as good, and it follows the exact same formula as Gavin, where you have a short fight, transform into his suit. It has to go back and explain the sex shop process every single episode. He gets sucked into the vision world, has to explain how the vision world works every single episode. In the Maku space segments in Gavin, it wasn't always in the rock quarry. Here, every single vision world sequence is in the rock quarry or in like the foggy sound stage, and that just gets boring so fast. And then he has to shoot down some fighter jets in his tank, and then he battles the monster in a sword fight and wins. And that's in every single episode, and that just gets so boring. And just because the out-of-suit action is not even close to as good as it was in Gavin, it just makes it so boring, so much less interesting. Not to mention, I feel like there are a lot more special effects gaffes here than there were in Gavin, like especially when they use like wire stunts. I can see the wire. I mean, I noticed that when I rewatched Gemman and Jew Ranger 2, but when I watched Gavin and Shider, I barely noticed it at all. Here, I feel like every single episode I could notice them using a wire stunt. And I don't know if it's just me, if I was just not feeling the season, I was just trying to point out something that I didn't like, but usually I don't pick up on it, and I did here. And I don't know, just the action overall was just way worse than it was in Gavin. The aesthetics are still pretty good. Sharavan's suit is a vast improvement over Gavin's suit. It looks so cool. Giving him a gun is so cool. It's called a Crime Buster, which is like the coolest name for a gun. But his suit overall is just looks so good, holds up incredibly well today. If you released that today, I would believe it. A lot of the soundtrack just feels like remixed version of Gavin's soundtrack. It has a good opening theme, but not as good as Gavin's. It has a decent ending theme, but not even close to as good as Gavin's. I don't really care about any of the insert themes here. His ship is really cool, but again, doesn't have a space dragon, so not as cool as Gavin's either. So in conclusion, Sharavan has higher highs than Gavin and also Shider, but just so inconsistent that I can't like it as much as either of those two seasons. I like what it did, feeling like an actual sequel to Gavin with a lot of recurring characters, but again, and mostly falling into episodic nature. And even though I think the story surrounding Planet Iga is better than what was done in Gavin, just emotionally, I cared a lot more with Gavin searching for his dad, even though it's a cliche storyline. Just the wild consistency of this season. It was just a letdown because I feel like it could have been better than Gavin, but it just wasn't because of how inconsistent it was, and also because of how it followed the exact same formula as Gavin. I still liked it, still thought it was a pretty decent show, but just when it comes to the Space Sheriff series, it's definitely my least favorite. Finally, moving on to Shider. And it's a season that I had to warm up to over time because it is one of the worst first impressions out of any Toko I've ever seen. Its premiere episode was awful, and then it continued with 12 more episodes that are just boring child filler plots basically. But basically after that, from episode 14 onward, it's fairly consistent, not as consistent as Gavin, but more consistent than Sharavan. I overall like the characters the best out of all of the shows. I think the villains are easily the best here, but just like Sharavan has much weaker action than Gavin, it does have some interesting story and slight connections to the overall lore, but overall it's more disconnected as a sequel than Sharavan was. But overall, just because of how consistent it was compared to Sharavan is why I prefer it more, even though I feel like Sharavan has higher highs. Dai is a fine protagonist. Just like all the other space sheriffs, he's pretty much just a nice guy baseline, kind of boring stoic character. He does have the only one that has a backstory as someone who was studying the Nazca lines before he was scouted to become a space sheriff. He does have a chosen one character where he's descendant of the ancient warrior Shider, which like Sharavan, I really don't like chosen one stories, but like Sharavan, it's not brought up too much, so I don't really mind it that much. Overall, he's fine. He's boring, but he's much better than like a raving lunatic weirdo, so he's fine. The other characters are really good, and by other characters, I literally just mean Annie. She's easily the best character in all the Space Sheriff series. She has an interesting backstory as her planet was destroyed by the Fuma, and she wants to take revenge on them by becoming a space sheriff. She's actually treated as a space sheriff like an equal to Dai, which I feel like the other two weren't. And she reminds me a lot of Ichijo from Kugo, where she's a character that can't transform, but she still fights alongside Shider. And I think that's really cool. She's directly involved in a lot of the action scenes, which Mimi and Lily were not, so that's really cool. I just don't like that she was turned into a damsel in distress too often, and that's my only problem with her, because other than that, she's easily the best character in all of the Space Sheriff series. The only other character worth mentioning is Kojiro, who's back. The connective tissue of all the Space Sheriff series is the comic relief scientist. Here he owns a pet shop for some reason, and I feel like they just did that because they didn't want to pay extra actors to run the pet shop, so they just had Kojiro run it, even though it has nothing to do with UFOs. But he's funny as always, so I don't mind him being back. The Fuma are the best villain faction out of the three, but they're still not the greatest. The main villain, Kublai, is easily the best because he at least has a backstory as the ruler of the ancient land of Mu, which is basically a civilization that led to the Inca and the Easter Island civilizations, if that makes any sense. I don't really know, but that's kind of interesting. And he's just a head, but that's because his head was cut off and his body was sealed away in ancient times, so it makes sense why he literally can't do anything, as opposed to Dawn Horror and King Psycho. Poe is fine as like the side villain, but she kind of just leaves after Kublai dies and doesn't really get any resolution for her character. It's just kind of weird. Hessler is one of the most boring villains I've ever seen. He's literally just a worse version of Guyler from Charivan somehow. There was one episode where his brother showed up, but then he killed him, so they didn't lead to anything. So really it's just Kublai and his backstory is why they're actually the best villain faction. They're not actually that great of villains, but at least have some sort of depth rather than just being surface level like the other two were. The world building and story is definitely weaker than Charivan, but the stuff with like the Nazca lines, how Warrior Scheider founded the Space Sheriffs, that's kind of interesting. But overall, it's not really that important throughout the show, and I don't really like how disconnected it feels as a sequel compared to Charivan. Like, they mention Gavin and Charivan in this season, but they don't actually show up. They only show up in like the clip show finale, so that's kind of lame. Like the previous two seasons, this show is mostly episodic, and it started off horribly with 13 episodes of complete trash, but from then on it got really good, especially episodes 14 to 19 I feel like are the best stretch of episodes in any of the Space Sheriff series. Just the overall consistency, like I can remember the plots of the episodes a lot more than Charivan. Like I remember the episode where like the two cyborg mercenaries go after Scheider, and the one where like the Magna monster prevents him from transforming, and when Annie saves a bus of school children all by herself. Like stuff like that. I can't remember anything from Charivan, but at least I can remember stuff from Scheider. We even got a pretty extended endgame arc. Like episodes 44 to 48 was an entire endgame arc, which I usually didn't think they had in older Toku, so that was cool. The action still isn't as good as Gavin, not even by a long shot. Similar to Charivan, just because you don't have Kenji Oba, who can do really cool stunts out of suit, it's just not as cool. Well, the action overall isn't as good. The addition of Annie and a lot of the action scenes makes it feel different. So even though the action is overall worse, I feel like having an extra character who can fight makes it at least a little unique. The formula is unfortunately pretty much the exact same as the other two, although here it feels the least repetitive for whatever reason. I don't really know why. He does a small fight, he transforms into his suit, it goes over Shoket's process. I feel like it's more brief than the Jochok and the sex shop process, so that might be why I like it more. But has a small fight in his suit, gets sucked into strange space, and then they have to explain how strange space works. And then he's sucked into the Rock Quarry's other soundstage, like in Charivan, so not really any unique locations after that, which is really lame. But I feel like after that, like the way he deals with the flying ships that he has to shoot down, like sometimes Annie mans the ship for him, sometimes he uses the tank, sometimes he transforms his ship into his robot, sometimes he uses the big Magnum to take down the giant face ship. I feel like there's more variation, even though it's pretty much the exact same formula. Maybe I was just looking into things too much. Maybe it is the exact same, but it just felt different, even though it's basically the exact same formula, which is my biggest gripe with the Space Sheriff series. I don't know why they have to follow this formula all the time. It's so boring, but it is what it is, and this one I feel like does it best. The aesthetics are still pretty good. I wasn't a big fan of Scheider's suit at first, but now when I look at it, I think it looks pretty good. Obviously not as cool as Charivan's, but still an improvement over Gavin's suit. Music is still pretty good. The opening theme is definitely the weakest out of the three. It's still fine, but not the greatest. And the ending theme is pretty good, better than Charivan's, but not as good as Gavin's. His ship is pretty cool. Like as a spaceship, it's a pretty cool spaceship. And the fact that it can like transform into different things like the giant Magnum and the robot is pretty cool, but it's not the Space Dragon, so not as cool as Gavin's ship. So in conclusion, I feel like Scheider is just the baseline of the Space Sheriff series. It doesn't have the highs that Charavan has. It doesn't have the awesome action that Gavin has. It has a little bit of everything. Like, you still have cool action because Annie's involved. You have a little bit of world building, and overall it's much more consistent than the boom or bust quality of Charavan. So I like it in the middle, in between Gavin and Charavan. Still an enjoyable show, but Gavin still beats it out in my opinion. So finally I'm going to answer the question: is the Space Sheriff series worth watching? And in my opinion, it is. Maybe just one. I would say watch Gavin, and if you're a huge fan of Gavin, then there's 2 more you can watch. Because to be honest, there's not that many differences between them. In my opinion, Gavin is the best just because of how cool the action is, and I feel like you can't really pull off action like that nowadays. So at least give something new. It's still older, so you feel like older Toku. It has like that type of feel, which I'm not a big fan of, but I can understand why people would like it. It definitely feels really retro. I like old things, so that appeals to me in that sense, but I just don't like how little world building there is overall. It's really, really episodic, so if you like that, then you have this. But it's just the formula overall. It just gets tiring really fast. I don't know why every single one of the seasons had to follow the exact same formula, basically. But as classic Toku, I think it's great, especially Gavin. And Gavin is definitely worth watching. Sharv and Shider are there if you want more of it, but overall I'm glad that I watched it. I exposed myself to older Toku that I usually don't do. It got me excited to watch some more older Toku, so overall I'm glad that I watched it, and it was definitely a worthwhile watch for me. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm actually recording this before Gavin Infinity comes out, but I'm going to be posting it like a month after Gavin Infinity premieres, so hopefully it's good. But with Sentai officially over, I'll probably do some more videos just about like rankings, like ranking the changers. I'll probably actually get around to ranking the opening themes and ending themes, even though I probably won't be using the actual music in the video itself. I just like the music so much that I just want to rank it in one way or another. And then for April Fools, I'll have a season review for a show that I've always wanted to watch. It's been on my radar for a long time. You'll see what it is on April Fools, and I'm really excited to make it and watch this show. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Feedback is always appreciated. Have a great day.